Woof! Hello! Welcome to Niki Gets Bored, the show where you get educated when I get bored. Having Sir Bubos Pugsley with me and wearing this lovely, very flattering mask can only mean one thing. It's time for the Bubonic Plague. We have already talked about what this disease is, Yersinia Pestis, and what it can do, but let me refresh your memory. There are three types of Yersinia Pestis. Bubonic causes buboes up to the size of a large apple, delusions, nightmares.
It was the worst nightmare I ever had.
Fever, swelling behind the ears, in the groin, and the underarms. Wherever you have a lymph node, you get swollen. Those buboes and sores leak blood and pus. You've got septicemic, when the bacteria gets into your blood. Same horrible symptoms, but you also get to add dying skin and dying muscles to your symptoms. And last is pneumonic. Pneumonic is when the infection gets into your lungs, and once it's in your lungs, you can spread it by air. Healthy people, young people mostly lived, but the victims would sometimes die in a matter of hours, or they could suffer for days, even weeks sometimes, in a delusional state or in a coma before dying. The plague of Justinian happened about 800 years before the bubonic plague. We will get to see what people changed to handle it this time around. There are some new treatments that are just as silly sounding as those last ones, the ones used during Justinian's plague, and they accidentally do a few things right too. So before we get into any of that though, let's set the stage. England, 1348. It's the Middle Ages. Have you ever been to someone's house and thought, how do people live like this? Maybe you find an excuse to stand because you are not sitting on anything. That's how all of England was in the Middle Ages. In a word, ew. It was extremely unsanitary. People would use chamber pots during the night and just toss their waste out the window or off a balcony the next morning. If a pet died, they would do the same. It's where we get the phrase, "it's raining cats and dogs," although it wasn't first used until the 17th century. And that means England was gross for hundreds of years. People didn't bathe either. It was believed that bathing, sitting in water naked, was the sin. Seeing and having your flesh out in the open may tempt you too much, making God angry. I mean, I kind of get it. Like, look at his shoulder. Ooh, that's a good shoulder. No, that didn't work. Bathing was a no-no at the time. They would take a bath, though, once a year, but it was one bath for the entire family. Dad got to start, then Mom, then the kids, lastly the baby. The water would keep getting dirtier each time a new family member got bathed, hence the expression, "don't throw the baby out with the bath water." They just weren't sanitary at all. During this time, if babies made it to the age of 1, their percentage of living to adulthood went up to just 50%. Despite all the death from poor living, they were actually having a population boom and had a few years in a row of having a bad harvest. So there were more people alive than there was food to go around.
Please, sir, I want some more.
When there was food, it was lacking in nutrients, so people would get extremely sick even before the Black Death. England had also just won their freedom from the Normans, and King Edward III started the 100 Years' War. Just like before, people were traveling for war. This is why learning history is important. If King Edward III had cracked open a history book, he may have learned going to war during an epidemic will just get everyone sick and killed. It was the Middle Ages, so Maybe books were hard to come by. I don't know. But no matter what, I know the English were doomed. The plague once again started in Asia. I've looked ahead, and there are epidemics that started outside of China. You'll have to keep watching the show to find out which ones. History shows the plague making its way west. It started around 1339 in Central Asia. By 1347, boats with rats with fleas were coming into Constantinople. You may remember from our Plague of Justinian episode that Constantinople is the middle of all trade. Around the same time, ships came across the Black Sea to Sicily with sick people and infected rats on board. The Black Death made it to Gascony, France, that same year, 1347. And finally, it got to Weymouth, England in 1348. It took less than a year for it to go from Central Asia to the UK. This bout lasted until 1351, though it did keep coming back for centuries. The bubonic plague killed around 200 million people, more than any other plague ever. Hey, did you know that 520 million people have died so you can learn how to handle disease? I sure hope you aren't letting their deaths be in vain. Speaking of handling disease, just how did our medieval ancestors handle this round of Yersinia Pestis? Back in Justinian's day, they tried cold baths, powders, amulets, bloodletting. They were still using all of these in the 1300s, though they switched from a cold bath to a rose-filled bath. And rose baths, they didn't stop Yersinia Pestis, but it had to be nice to get nice and clean and smell good. That alone would have been reason enough for me to go find someone infected and lick them. I like being clean. Then again, maybe licking a contagious dying person isn't the best idea. Time for a sidebar. Not everyone was filthy. Nostradamus was alive at the time. He's the guy that made a bunch of predictions, of which many have been correct. He's fascinating and worth looking into. He was 15 years old, but already working as a doctor. He had a natural immunity to the Black Death, and he treated many sick people. He was a stickler for cleanliness. He even washed his hands between patients. Mind-blowing. He was so far ahead of his time. I could be convinced he was a time traveler. He also believed in proper body disposal. He would bury them deep or burn them instead of mass open graves or thin wood boxes with red crosses on them. His patients had a higher rate of getting better, likely because of his cleanliness and safety habits. It's a shame no one else got the hint, because England stays unsanitary a long time. Another famous person around at the time was William Shakespeare. And when he was young, he lost 3 sisters and 2 brothers to bubonic plague. So 5 siblings died from bubonic plague. Later, he lost a son, also to the Black Death, and later still a grandson to Yersinia Pestis. That's how long it stayed strong in Europe. Long enough to kill his siblings when he was young, his son when he was older, and then his grandson when he was even older. It just kept coming back. By the way, the 3 names I've been using for the disease, bubonic plague, Black Death, and Yersinia Pestis, is not what they called it during the plague. They would have called it the Great Mortality or the Pestilence. Its name changed as humans learned more about it. I also have a correction to make from the second episode. I said animals got sick too. This is true, except for dogs. Dogs have a natural immunity, So all of your Mr. Whiskers, Mr. Eds, Clarabelles, and Lamberts, they're all dead. But your Spots, Dukes, and Rovers, they are most likely safe. You're safe, Bobo. It's fun sleep. There are more treatments besides a bath. They would cut open a bubo, then cover it with butter, onions, and fig to draw out the sickness. It was a treatment. It almost sounds tasty. Since it was believed pockets of bad air caused the illness, odors were used to defend against getting sick. Doctors wore a mask like this one. And they would stuff herbs and flowers, basically potpourri, into the nose to keep bad air pockets away. It actually was effective for the airborne version, Pneumonic, because it worked as our face masks do now. It filtered the air they breathed. Score one on accident. Not everyone had access to pleasant smelling things, so poo and pee could also be used to cover bad pockets of air. Then my favorite is they would take a live frog, rib it, and rub its belly all over a sick person's body. So much of medical history is trial and error, like, let's rub poop in it. Well, that didn't work. Shall we try a frog next? I want you to close your eyes. Are they closed? All right, you got them closed? All right. Imagine you're in bed sick. You feel terrible. You have many large sacks of pus-filled balls all over your body. They are in crevices, like the neck, the underarm, between your legs. You are surrounded in filth. There are buckets of poo and pee surrounding you. Maybe some is even smeared on you or the bed to keep bad air away. A doctor comes to you in his mask and a black robe, looking like death himself. He pulls open his medical bag and pulls out a frog. It gives off a loud croak as it's rubbed on you, and you can't help but think, that's right, little frog, I'm for sure going to croak. Did you imagine it? Going through all of that while not knowing any of the science behind the bubonic plague is why I can kind of understand some of the weird theories people had about what was happening. Theory one was the aligning of Saturn, Jupiter, and Mars caused it. Astrology was big back then, I guess. Theory two, we'll have to wait.
What?
Yeah, there is so much good information on the bubonic plague, and I want to share so much of it. However, I know people like to watch more than one video while using the bathroom.
Niki.
Don't act like you don't watch videos while pooping. Everyone does it. It's a first world perk. So, I've broken this up into 2 episodes, and the second half will be out in 2 weeks. Until then, I love you all. I hope you don't mind the darkness in my room. It is a thunderstorm brewing outside. It's nice and dark, and hopefully you can see me okay. I love you all. I always say that because it's always true. Take care, and I'll see you again when Niki gets bored.